Right, everyone. So we're almost ready to start again. Before we start, I just want to let everybody know that we're really lucky to have some archivists here from LCC today, who brought some examples from the Les Coleman collection. And there's some information up on the board about the archive. I'll put it up again at the next break. But yeah, do check out what's over there during the breaks, because it's a really fascinating history of comics, American comics, British comics. And yeah, so please do make sure you go and have a look at that. Don't take any drinks over when you look at it, because you don't want any disasters. But okay, so without further ado, let's start the panel. So I'll let Douglas introduce.
Hello. So I'm Dr. Snowball. The reason I am the chair for this discussion on small press is not only have I been working in small press comics for far too long, but I'm also one of the publishers of Dark and Golden Books, who republish forgotten and lost British comics from the 1960s through to the 2000s. Our panel here run the gamut of different roles within.
What is the gamut?
The gamut is the range. It's the range of different roles within small press, from academia to producing them at perhaps the height of their popularity, I might say. I think what we want to do here is kind of explore the shape of what small press comics have been, a little bit of the history, and see if we can learn from all of that. So what I'm going to ask everybody to do is just introduce themselves one at a time as we go down the line, and just talk a little bit about how they're involved with small press comics.
Right, so my name's Ian Overhill, and I'm a professor in graphic communication at London College of Communication, and I research comics and illustration and graphic design. And in terms of small press comics, I suppose, well, initially I'm a fan, and I go back being a fan to the kind of late 70s and the 80s, and a collector of the kind of material. This is way before I thought you could actually study this as an academic, and at the time I was an art student, and then I was an architectural historian, and then I realised, actually because of Scott McCloud's book Understanding Comics, when it was the first bits that were shown in Cerebus, I thought, oh, actually you can do something serious with comics, you can actually study them. And so then my academic career was to kind of pursue that. And in terms of small press comics, I'm particularly interested in the Les Coleman collection, which we've got a selection of material at the back of the room. And in particular, a small part of that overall massive collection, which is focused on mini comics, and have organised a couple of exhibitions around that material. So I think that's enough for it.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, hi, I'm Paul Gravett, and I was a very good friend, as a lot of people here were, with Les, we miss very much. And he put together a fantastic collection which represents UK and US zines, small press comics, and we just say particularly mini comics. And I helped him out with a little exhibition that we did, a very little exhibition because it was held in the Book Art bookshop. And there's not an awful lot more room than just for books, basically. Anyway, my background is I can't say this briefly, but I won't take all day. But I will just simply say that I came up with the name fast fiction by looking through a Mill Street price guide, looking for something we could call it, and it sounded like fast food. And at the time, Phil Elliott and Ian Wheatrick, who were mates, and Phil, we went to school around the same time. I was a bit older. We decided to take a table at the comic marts, the old comic marts, which were nothing but basically American comics. There's hardly any British stuff, let alone anything else. And from there, that became a kind of impromptu distro service and also a regular meeting point for all kinds of people, self-publishing. And that pulled into a movement, you could say, I think. It was a kind of, it wasn't, you don't plan these things at all, but something really exciting happened. I remember when I first came across Ed's work, it was so exciting. I can remember when Woodrow came round to the flat, when Peter and I, my father and I, were making Escape and realising we've got another amazing artist. Where's this person come from? And you were wearing spats. We had never seen anybody wear spats before. And so that's a long answer. Well, not very long actually. But anyway, I'm very delighted to be here, and I'll pass it on to Mr. Vincent.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ed Pensent. I've been drawing and self-publishing comics since 1982. It's over 40 years. Kind of a latecomer to fast fiction, but I did arrive in the autumn of 1982 when I saw Paul Rivette's table. A lot of things started from that. During my time, I ran the fast fiction service, mail order service for small press comics. I also published and edited for a time the Fast Fiction Anthology. You can see some issues there projected on the screen now. It was started by Phil Elliott and I took it over. And I also sat behind the table that Paul's talking about at Westminster Comic Marts. So I did all of those things, pretty steeped in the thing about small press. So what I hope to speak about at some point is my belief in the power of small press publishing, and why it's important and why I've stuck to it. So I hope Douglas will give me a prompt like that in due course.
Otherwise, just steer it.
But this panel resonates with me enormously. I knew Les Coleman. I'm very glad that his collection has been preserved. In my day job, I'm a digital archivist and I work at Senate House Library, so I feel a lot of connection with these two professional information managers in the panel as well. So thank you for inviting me.
Hi, my name is Woodrow Phoenix. I'm also another alumnus of the fast fiction time. I saw my first piece, that's by me, that cover there. I saw my first thing it was in a comic shop in New Cross, and it was by Eddie Campbell. It was a photocopied zine comic, and it completely just rearranged my thinking, because I never really thought that you could just make a comic if you wanted to. And this person had done this. He'd drawn and written this thing. He photocopied it. The cover was blue paper, but he had stuck little bits of stickers and coloured it in, so it was a colour cover. And he did it all himself. And I thought, wow, you can do that. And yeah, so I made something after that, as a result of seeing that. And then
20 pence.
Yes, that's right. And going to the Westminster Comic Mart, I don't know how I found out about that, but I went to it anyway. And then there were all the other people who were also doing photocopy comics. And it was almost like instant. There was this community that I discovered and became part of, just like that, from all these people who were doing something in a similar, obsessed kind of way. And yeah, obviously there's many more things to tell you, but I'll just stop there for now.
I'm Sarah Mahata, and I manage the Archives and Special Collections Centre at the University of the Arts London. So we're based in London College of Communication, which is where we were mentioned, at the Elephant and Castle, and that's where we keep the Les Coleman collection and a few other collections of comics that people have put together and donated to us, which we'll mention a bit later probably. I was lucky enough to go to Les Coleman's house to have a look at the collection and advise on whether the university should keep it, and of course the answer was yes. So it's a fantastic collection to be preserved and used and enjoyed to inspire people. So we use it a lot in teaching, and it's used for research, and we like to see it for our interest as well. So it has quite a broad audience that comes to enjoy it, along with our other comic collections, which of course also lend themselves to engagements to different younger and older audiences too. So, and I work alongside my colleague Mike in the library.
Yes, so I work in the library with the special collections in the library, which are different from the archive. We can talk about that later if it's interesting. And the way that we've come to work with small press comics was a bit of a turnaround. So in 2009, we started our zine collection, which since then has grown into being like the biggest zine collection in an institution in the UK. And within that collection, obviously, there's a lot of comics with an A. comics, and there's a lot of blend and kind of boundary blurring between the tradition of people that were making fanzines or zines in comic form and the small press comic movement. So what we, over the years, what we started seeing is that there were a lot of artists, like Gary's own work, that we have lots of it in the collection, that actually maybe the scene label wasn't fitting as well. And we were also very lucky to receive this huge donation from Sina Sansavari, who works both across scenes and small press comics. And we were eventually, by luck, forced into acknowledging, no, we need to split out. And it's only been recently, like in the last couple of years, that we've offshoot and created a small press comics collection, and we're in that kind of weird position that you're an institution or a library of making decisions of what it's what. So I'm really excited to hear about your perspective as makers to, you know, because we're making decisions that aren't really supposed to be made. So yeah.
Thank you. That's you made a fantastic point there, one that I want to build on, which is the idea that small press grew out of fan press and fanzines and magazines about comics that weren't necessarily comics themselves that started appearing. I'm going to go ahead, I think. Ed, what are your sort of first, what do you think the origins of small press were in Britain? What were the early titles that you know of?
I'm going to answer that question in a completely oblique manner. See, when I turned up at Westminster in October 1982, I'd come out of art college. And what I'd seen at art college was something that got me very excited, which was mail art and cassettes. In the early 1980s, homemade cassettes were quite a thing. And people used to do photocopied covers for them, and there was a network. You'd send them out through the mail, and you could get your music published instantly, get it to an audience instantly. And it was underground, and it was fast, and it was fun. The same with mail art as well. Mail art could be poetry, photographs, images. People doing these odd little booklets of poetry, things which was quite obscure. Again, I thought, yeah, this is so direct. There's such an immediacy to this means of creation, and it's cheap and affordable. And surely anybody could do it if they can get to a photocopy shop, or if they could duplicate a cassette, and if they could go to the post office, they could become an artist and a publisher. Really excited me. Well, I was also interested in comics, because I had been for a long time, and when I came to Westminster, I thought, surely there's some equivalent thing going on with cassettes in comics. It turns out there kind of was. Fast fiction turned out to be it. And I stand by that to this day. You know, it's the immediacy and the accessibility of that method of photocopying, getting it out to an audience. You really cannot beat it. Photocopying had become very affordable by that point, and much more accessible than it used to be. Eddie Campbell had quite a poetic phrase that he wrote. It seemed to happen on photocopiers all around the world. And it did. There was an explosion of creative talent. So I don't know what that means, but that's what I was looking for. So I'm sorry, I can't remember any early titles. But that's my reply.
Campbell obviously is one of those artists that came out of fan press. His early Barbarian comics in Zephyr fancy are not much talked about, but they're interesting. And then Beam, I think, is
Coke Lump or something.
it's one of the first kind of all-in-one.
That was done when he was at Arts,
Yeah.
wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, exactly. And then from our reading, our reading is that the sort of first big, not quite anthologies, not quite copies of American Undergrounds are Beam and possibly Bank Memoirs of Kevin O'Neill, which are never completed, but yeah, so we did that. But something Ed said there, at this point to you, I think, Paul, obviously fast fiction was a node of...
It's my turn.
Oh, sorry. Oh, there we go. Obviously fast fiction was like a node of a group of people coming together. But the same thing that was happening in photocopies around the world was photocopies around the UK. So were you aware of other groups?
Yeah, I don't think I was aware of other groups, but certainly where there was a lot of self-publishing happening. And a key person, of course, was Mal Burns, who needs a lot of credit because he brought a lot of the underground comics into the alternative comics and the small press comics evolution. And he used to review in, I think it must be Fancy Advertiser, probably wasn't it? He had a column which I scoured. And I mean, it's going to sound that I can be a bit honest about, but it's a little bit sad, but basically I just wanted to meet people really. And I'm a sociable person, but also I was a bit bored with Marvel DC stuff. I'd just come back from the States in the late 70s and was stuck in a job I was not happy with. And I thought, I'm going to do something without any kind of plan beyond the fact that I'm going to order some of these zines, to send off postal orders back in those days, and see what comes up. And not all of it was particularly good, but some of the things I thought were really good. The other fact you have to remember is that at the Comic Marts, which was if you were a self-publisher, there was nowhere to sell. You had to go around and go, excuse me, would you like looking at my comic? And you'd be interrupting people who were really just interested in getting the Spider-Man number, whatever. And so this is crazy, we need to have something where you can just bring it together. And so I just thought, well, I could set this up and just make it happen from there. But there was already, it obviously goes right back to at least the underground comics movement, which didn't necessarily use print, essentially didn't use photocopying. As you said, the photocopying became much more available, much more affordable, and that made everything transform. And I don't remember any particularly important key titles. I just know there was a lot of variety, and there was just the excitement that these people aren't necessarily aiming what they're doing. Some were, but they weren't necessarily aiming at the Beano or 2000 AD or Marvel. They weren't. I don't want to use the word wannabes, but I just used it. Because they weren't just looking at, I'm going to do what is there already. So there was that other aspect, okay, I mean all the music stuff, but there was also a sort of new wave punk, post-punk, a sense of DIY, a sense of, I'm going to do comics my way. And I thought, this is just so exciting. This is something we need here in the UK. Especially because I was luckily very aware of what was happening in other parts of Europe, especially in France, and had seen an explosion of stuff happening there around the same period.
And of course, because they were photocopied,
Yeah.
comics,
Yeah.
they're ephemeral, as we talked about, but
Did they talk about that? Did they talk about the big ephemeral? What other people talk about that? I mean, people didn't ask about what's your print run.
They did.
Perhaps they some did.
Some do write it on the inside.
Yeah,
of
some
the
did.
disease,
Fair
see
enough,
that.
yes.
But what I was going from that to Plank actually and say, of those early ones, how often do you see things turn up in archives? How often do you get broken runs or incomplete runs or damaged?
I mean, a full run, it would be very, very rare to get, even from more recent stuff. So, even things from the 90s or 2000s that we have from the Xena collection, we have almost full runs, but there's always like one or two things that are missing. I would say, so obviously, we do have a few things from the pre-punk, pre-Xerox explosion, pre-photocopier. They were using the mimeographs from the 40s, 50s, sci-fi and all the cartooning. But that's very, very rare. So maybe we have a dozen out of the 5,000. Then when the punk explosion came, which obviously was a time where scenes were dime a dozen, they were like everywhere. Still, I would say we have maybe from the biggest titles, maybe 4 or 5 titles out of a run of 20. And it obviously then gets incremental with the years. It's more likely that something that is from the 2000s we may have a more complete run, but it is quite rare because again things get damaged, things are not made. I mean, I don't know if your intention was for things to survive across the decades, but with most zine makers that we have talked to, they never thought that that was going to survive the month, less the the 3-4 decades. So it's quite it's a strange situation to be preserving things that were never meant to exist outside the community, outside the orange speculation market, but it also has an invaluable preciousness to it.
Well, I think, yeah.
I would just say that actually we were making stuff with the idea that it was going to last, because that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to make things that were going to be great to look at. I think it's important to also remember that photocopying was actually state of the art in the 80s. You know, you didn't get better than that, you couldn't afford better than that. That was how things were done because that was the best technology that we had. So we did different things to try and make that work. One of the covers you saw up there from the Pulp Fiction thing was my great idea to swap out the drum in the photocopier to use a second colour on our covers. And that was like crazy radical thinking.
It's almost Cinerama.
Yeah, it was. Like red and black on the same page. That's like my next style.
Essentially, voiceovers right now. Keep hold of that microphone, because what I was going to ask you is, have you kept all of your stuff? Did you keep an archive of not just your
Of
comics,
course,
but
yeah.
your art as well?
Yeah, I haven't looked at it all in a long time. The last time I actually looked at anything was probably about 12, 13 years ago when I had to move studios, so I had to box everything up. And I looked at it all back then. But yeah, I haven't really looked at much since. What's really scary, as I'm sure I can attest as well, is that because we've been doing this for a long time now, I was looking for something particular last year, and I was going through a box of artwork, and I was finding things that obviously I had drawn them because they were in this box, but I didn't know where they were from, didn't know what they were about. It was like looking at work of someone else. It was kind of scary, and that happens a lot at this point.
When we did our underground comics with Dave Gibbons, he was surprised by his own. He kept all that art because he couldn't think anybody wanted it. So he brought them around and I scanned them new. And he was looking as promising, isn't it?
Now, I think from a production point of view, what was important for me particularly, I don't know, I speak for myself, and this is that part of what made it all so important and appealing was just making stuff. The idea that you've got a thought, you've got an idea of something, and you can then just turn it into something you've got in your hand. And that's magical and kind of amazing. And I've never really gotten over that feeling of making things exist that didn't exist before. And I think a big kind of impetus to keep going is just to see things on a table, on a shelf that you've made, and see other people kind of reading these things and liking them, enjoying them, and meeting people who are doing the same thing and getting excited. That was going to Westminster Comic Mart every, what it was, 6 weeks or something.
Was it bi-monthly?
Bi-monthly, yeah.
Bi-monthly, I think.
And seeing what new things
Yeah.
other people had done. And there was lots of cross-pollination going on, like someone would do something. I was looking at that cover by Rocky, you know, 1-2 Rocky, Frank
Frank
Larson.
Larson,
on
yes,
the back.
yes.
And that was super inspiring to me to see that. I remember that. And also seeing the Help Sharp guys did a comic where they embossed the cover by ironing it. So they put cardboard underneath, ironed that cardboard, and they had an embossed cover. And I was like, wow, this is incredible! And I wanted to emboss something straight away.
The help shot.
Yeah,
All of those designs are fantastic.
yeah.
And I think, yeah, you on your website have an archive of the things that help shot was doing.
I've got an archive of everything done, because I kept all my small press comics, and yeah, I put covers of most of them on the website. Chris Flewitt was one of the major talents behind Help Shark, and he was directly inspired by the cover designs. I think his name is Peter Saville, who did Factory Records, and he thought, how can I bring that into comics to some extent? So again, what a wonderful idea. I'm going to go off on a completely different tangent again. What I loved about fast fiction and the small press was how little of it was to do with comics, as a lot of people understand it. You may say, okay, there's these science fiction and superhero romeographed fanzines that existed in the 60s and 70s. I felt fast fiction was new. It was people doing personal stories, artistic stories, things that were quite unlike what you'd expect a comic story to look like. The art was exceptionally unusual, more like illustration or book design or something completely unusual. I think a lot of people picked up on this energy that they thought, we've never seen anything like this in comics before. And I certainly hadn't either. It's one of the things that really inspired me to keep going. I would always bring in artists into the fast fiction anthology if I liked them. It was simple as that. I thought, yeah, I really like what you're doing. I'm just going to get you into this other comic as soon as I possibly can. Send me a 6-page submission. I'm not going to be rich or famous, but I just like what you're doing. Retrospectively, I think what we tried to build was an artist collective. It was, run on artistic principles. I'm not a businessman. I can't add up, and I'm certainly not a promoter or very good at hyping stuff. But I do believe in art, and in the small milieu that we had, the small numbers of people involved, and the collective effort that was taking place was, I would say, something quite unique.
Yeah, I was absolutely. I was actually just about to ask you anyway. I can project to the room while I steal my microphone. Well, I was just about to ask you anyway, is that something that you've seen in terms of sort of groups of people, gangs of people in various anthologies?
Well, I think in the collection it's interesting because you've got the work of Association, the French collective.
What's that again? Sorry.
Association. And those are very different from this kind of photocopy aesthetic that we've been talking about. These are high quality, well produced, beautiful, offset light on the cover.
Stick knife in there.
But they're all
Just saying, what you just saying.
I would say that the majority of them are black and white.
Yes,
so it's
that's right.
definitely not typical French comics.
Yeah, that is true.
That's
And there's also things in the collection where you've got work by Gary Planter, which definitely goes into that field of art practice. There's quite a lot of mail art postcards in there as well, which Les was collecting, I'm assuming, saying, oh yeah, well it is a comic, and was very happy to understand it as a comic. So I think it's very interesting that, yes, we can say that the photocopier maybe was a democratising kind of leveller, but I think we also have groups of people coming together collectively and using other kinds of what I might call more artistic kind of media or even more mainstream production methods. So we have to think about it in a more complicated way. I think mainly this, we have the early stage of it, and it opened it up, and we have 8-pagers, off-the-cuff comics in the 70s, early 80s, and then something else. In a way that was like a kind of groundbreaking. And then we get waves of people after that, who are kind of building on it, but doing it in their own way and doing it differently. So I think there's kinds of shifts. And the good thing about the Les Common collection is that he's collected through that entire period, really going back to the probably late 70s, all the way to, 2010-ish, I suppose. So you actually see all this variety within the collection, and that's what makes it such a really valuable resource.
Yeah, and again, building on that, you do see this ebb and flow of scenes. So the past fiction scene obviously lasted for a particular length of time. What Chris Reynolds was doing, Mauritania. Again, that was very much a gang of 4 main people in that, not just Chris. Although yourself, you were there. Woodrow, it was as well. And then that sort of, those kind of groups of people kind of let voices that might not think of going out to do a comic on themselves first, get a space. So I'm thinking in terms of Carol Swain here. I know you were there for a workshop for early comics.
Yeah, it was at the Comics Icon Classic exhibition.
Mhm.
Yeah, she was her first comic.
Yeah, and we published Carol. We're going to publish a new one later this year of her comics in Mauritania. Actually, so we're hopefully going to try and get a little more of those into print. But in terms of the makeup of the scenes, the various scenes, what kind of a gender split? What kind of were you seeing in the 80s? Because obviously there's people like Carol, there's people like Myra, Hancock.
Yeah.
What kind of a makeup of
You're looking
people?
at me, aren't you?
Yeah,
it's just nice to see that we have a different gender, what was the phrase again, gender what? Balance, whatever, or gender, whatever, here, because we've got quite a lot of women and men, presumably, in the audience, but yeah, it was rather male. And I think it's fair to say that there were important collectors. There was Sour Cream, wasn't there, which maybe, I'm sure, must be in Leslie's archives. And there were various women's groups, and obviously there was a whole zine culture for the feminism and for lesbianism and all that kind of thing was existing too. And we didn't have we weren't mean, we were a bit sexist perhaps, but we just what was there, and who would go into, for example, fast fiction, and then from there also sometimes also into escape as well. And Myra was a I think she'd already been doing it basically up in Camden Lock Market, hadn't she? She'd got this fantastic punky outfit with a pink bow and a kind of a bit like a cinema ice cream vendor, where she had to look and take that thing walking around selling them. She was fantastic, and it was already making stuff of her own. There was Helen McCookery book, I think, was in the music world. You probably know about her. But yeah, and Carol Swain was a revelation, and it's just when I remember going over to her place and seeing her paintings. She says, "I love making my paintings, but I want to tell a story, and I can't make it work in one. I love writing. I love sorry, the names aren't on my head now. But I mean,
Raymond Carver.
Raymond Carver. There we go. Carver. What a Carver. Yes, Raymond Carver. She was getting into writing, and of course, art school doesn't want you to do that. I mean, art schools, paint, please, and big, because we've got these ridiculous aircraft hangars that have to be filled with enormous canvases. You can't do small works or sequential works, narrative. We don't want any narrative. No, forget about the Bear Tapestry or whatever else. No, it must be as obscure as possible and as big as possible. So Carol just really found comics as the perfect marriage, pictures and words, to express herself. And she's still, I think, one of the greatest comic artists we've ever had. Not just in the UK, I mean, just on a global scale. Remarkable. Yeah.
Should we pick up on that one? Yeah, sure. The gender balance thing is a point. The only other person I can think of in that list would be Susie Varty.
Sure.
Denny Derbyshire, thank you, Harley, yes. Susie Varty came out of the
Julia
Birmingham
Harms.
Arts, yes, yeah. Callie Stapleton turned out not to be a girl, as an alias for Chris Fluid.
We were always saying, when Callie Stapleton was making these sort of potato print comics, and in fact they're still making them. There's a new issue of a new zine which I've just been given, Speedboat. It's not really a zine at all now, of course. It's sort of extremely glamorously produced and free, because it's so kind of, and you can't find it. I mean, you have to. In fact, I got given a few copies, sent a few copies, and give them to people you don't like. That's interesting, right? And they maybe have them in record stores, but they're definitely not, aiming at selling them really. And it's typical crazy Chester group. And there are still new Callie Stapleton. So we were comics in it, and I remember someone saying, we kind of we wanted to meet Callie Stapleton, and the other guys, Gavin and Steve and Chris, would always be turning up from Chester. Why can't she come? She never came because she didn't exist. So I'm sorry you've heard that already, but the fact is it's an appointment really, and it was a slightly strange thing to do it because they wanted to look hip that they'd got a woman on board their team. Sorry, that's not that.
No, at all.
Right. Yeah.
Sadly, I think the whole Westminster comic art thing was a bit blokey as well.
A bit sweaty.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, exactly. There's nothing wrong with comics fans, but that wasn't the milieu we were operating in, sadly.
There's a lot wrong with comics fans.
I'm trying to be diplomatic. The landscape has changed enormously, and the gender balance that now exists in UK small press comics, and indeed the ethnic balance and many other balances, is now quite remarkable and much healthier in terms of representations of the talent that exists within society. You could say on that account, fast fiction didn't quite live up to it.
Sarah, we've not heard from you yet. I want to talk a little bit more about what you see in the archives in terms of how production shifts.
Okay, well actually, if I may, I'd like to pick up on that.
Oh, absolutely.
previous conversation. Because we were looking earlier, one of you came to the table and we were looking at Susan Catherine's work as well.
Yes.
Susan Catherine's Overheard series, which
She's
is fascinating expensively produced. It seemed to be late 80s and before the photocopier explosion. And it seems to be stories that she's overheard in cafes and things, you know, it's literally overheard. And that she's making her zines out of that. So that's amazing. But I mean, there are, as you said, the production shifts of the photocopier, the kind of the lithographed, you know, sort of more expensive productions. But then I think in both of the collections that all of the collections that we have in the college, there are many more kind of handmade and handmade. So they probably being made on equipment that people might have at home, or that are available to them in their college situation if they've got that. And in fact, on the board at the moment on the screen, you can see quite a selection of works that were Ian and a colleague of ours in the archive worked on a few years ago, really trying to bring out a range of different types of zine and asking people how they would describe them as well. So, I mean, one of the good things, obviously, you know this, one of the important features of zines is that they will give a voice to maybe silence, you know, they will articulate voices that are hidden, you know, and give platform for people who want to say something that isn't going to be recognised in mainstream publishing very easily. They don't need, you know, a multi-chapter volume monograph to say what they want to say. So it's another, you know, way of expressing that. So they don't necessarily lend themselves to traditional descriptions either. So you know, kind of shoehorn descriptions often perhaps into a standard that we apply to more traditional descriptions of works that you will find in libraries and archives. And maybe that doesn't do them justice. So you know, there are shifts in format and shifts in how we recognise that as well. And you know, we asked people, just students, people in the college, people walking through, if they'd have a go at describing something, cataloguing it in their way, and then we would sort of see how that compared with the cataloguing standards that we were professionally applying, that could be shareable with others, were they doing them justice. So you can see here some of the examples, in the section of archiving the collection down there, which Ian was involved in as well.
Yeah, so we were lucky enough to be able to get somebody in to actually archive all of the material, because when there aren't enough resources in archives and in special collections, so you get the material, but then you need to make it available to people. But that takes a lot of time because you have to write all these descriptions. It takes forever. So we were lucky enough to get somebody to do the mini comments and to actually write these captions. But then we got the students to try and write their own captions to see what they were coming up with, and they were very different. How are they different? They were a lot more personal. They brought in a lot more of their own individual background, whether that be nationality was one thing that came across in some of them, gender was another thing that came across in the caption, and we also got them to make their own comments in response to the facsimiles of comics that we made as well. So we made facsimiles of some of the collection, and then they could actually read them and go through them. And then we said, well, we want you to make your story now. If you want, you can just copy the story that you've been given, or you can come up with your own story and maybe steal their art style. It's up to you. So we got these amazing kind of responses, and it was really interesting just to do something that makes the collection live again. And it's kind of what you were saying about fast fiction, about something. It still inspires students now, and that's the best thing about it. Working with the material is the students go, wow, I can do something like this.
I thought you were about to say something else there. Please go ahead if you want. But what I'd like to do now is just come down like onwards, and if there is a single example of a small press comic that you would like people to be more aware of, I'd like us all to do that.
So
tricky question for you to ask me, because I've been working so much with Sina's collection in the last few months. And interestingly, lots of the work that he collected was from the US. So I'm going to, the ideas that are coming to mind are from the US. But actually, yeah, Paul, the exhibition that you're doing now in the
Queer as Comics,
yeah, Queer as Comics. So I should have said Sina's collection is comics focused, but mostly queer comics. And the earliest example that we have in there, which I brought, was Pinnamed Damsels by Roberta Gregory, which is a classic of lesbian comics. And that kind of started her career, and then she went on to do like really exciting, like bitchy butch comics. So I would say if that is, because it's a shame that some of the people that were making small press comics early on in the 70s, some have been revived and anthologies that have been published, but others not, and the reasoning why is sometimes kind of random. So Roberta Gregory, I would say, she would be one.
I'm thinking along the lines of the impact that zines and works can have on people's thinking and the way that people can address perhaps difficult subjects, and they can sort of maybe mediate a conversation or help somebody to think through difficult issues like real world issues. We have some comics that we use very sensitively and carefully, or some publications that we don't get out very often, and we haven't got them here today. But they're about conflict, and they're about conflict in areas of the world where there is still conflict today. And so you will always have multiple perspectives on that conflict, and whatever conflict is happening at the time. But wouldn't it be wonderful if something that, a kind of a form of expression like this that someone has used to explore their own thinking and to sort of explore the questions around that could be shared in a non-conflict way, in a way that would allow people to discuss their differences, and on a platform where they could be aired and viewed and respected, and then just potentially that might help people to move on to some form of peaceful discussion rather than conflict discussion. So, I know that's very idealistic, but perhaps it can happen in a small way which could then grow. And I think that that's one of the kind of the really powerful properties that art generally has, but you can see it within the discussions that are held and published within this particular form, I think, within the zine format and within this sort of underground or slightly off mainstream. The thing about articulating voices that are seldom heard, as I mentioned earlier, I think this is an example of where that can have some real power and potentially positive and peaceful impact. So that's my offering.
Okay. Actually, I'm going to talk about one of my comics, I think, because
Why not?
one of the things that we constantly run up against was the whole idea of difficulty in making the stuff we wanted to make. We were always limited by the tools we had, by the equipment that we had, how much things cost. So in some ways that made us inventive, right? All the hand things that we did. So I did this comic that was called The Big Sneeze, and I was again just playing around with the idea of what you can do with comics, and I wanted to make something that was going to be funny and that was going to be interesting, but was also going to be good to look at. So my first thought was to, rather than using or making it A5, I would make it A4, but fold it lengthwise, so it was a tall, thin thing. And then, so that immediately gave me a different shape to make the panels in. And then it occurred to me that if I could bind a A3 page into an A4 book, you could fold it out. So the whole comic is basically a giant sumo wrestler sneezing. So he's going, and then last fold out, you see him going, ah, shoot! But it's this big fold out like this. And about 10 years ago, I was in Paris and I saw that in a French bookshop in a bookcase for €50. So that it vindicated my experiment, I think, pretty well.
Excellent.
It's a great book. And the other one you did on oil paper was very nice as well.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm going to pick a comic called The Wimp.
Ah, yes.
About 6 copies of this zine that appeared in the 1980s. And there's an artist in there called Tim Budden, very talented Welsh fellow, whose work I loved his work, absolutely loved his work. Very fey Welsh chap, very modest, very soft-spoken. And in The Wimp, he had a character called Brock the Badger. Brock the Badger. And he drew these incredibly stylized, strong black and white drawings of this badger, kind of like woodcuts. The head was not like a naturalistic badger head, and yet it was totally a badger. You only had to look at this drawing and thought that is the essence of pure badgerness. And he got up to these incredible antics, they're quite surreal, and a whole community of other badgers that he was involved with. Those stories that were in The Wimp were some of my absolute favourites. Nothing really to do with comics. He challenged the idea of what a panel grid should look like, and had pretty much nothing but these landscape format panels. And the story's kind of surreal and poetic. But more than that, as Tim went on, because I've tried to follow his career, even when he went to China, he became...
Taiwan, actually.
Taiwan, I'm very sorry. Taiwan, yes.
Right, it's Taiwan.
He became Brock. Somehow he became Brock himself. And the Brock character took on a life that was incredibly important to him personally, as a means of expressing his own life, his own art, everything. And it became a super badger, and it changed into all kinds of other strange forms that were nothing like the original 80s stories. Tim Burton's art inspires me, his story inspires me. I think it's just absolutely magical stuff. And that's one of many things which I would never have seen if I wasn't doing fast fiction.
Yeah.
Tim Burton.
Yeah, Tim's actually now I met him a couple of years ago in Taipei, and he's quite a successful gallery artist and doing extraordinary paper construction works. They're very good. Still a lovely guy. Yeah. This is a very hard question. I can't just figure what's happening. I mean, anything I choose. I mean, you didn't choose me. So I don't know what to say. I think one that's just top of mind is Corpse Me Comics, which is a fantastic anthology about Battle of the Eyes. We haven't mentioned Savage Pencil, Chris Long, and the much missed Andy Johnson, who was an amazing artist for his brother's Matt's band. What were they called again? The, I don't know. Anyway, but that possibly was a really, especially the Silk Screen edition that was done, printed in Paris, was a fabulous object. It involved also the armour, I think, but it's something extremely non-PC. I can't really say the title properly. But anyway, but it was just a spectacular example of, I mean, not very kind of photocopied and zine and throwaway. This was a deluxe art approach to comics, and it's a remarkable thing.
Yeah, it's impossible, you're right. It's totally impossible. I guess one I choose would probably be Raw Magazine. And I choose Raw Magazine because...
Not exactly small.
Well,
As it was small.
well, it wasn't small size, no, it's
No,
quite
but
large.
yeah.
Not kind of A3
Self-published,
size, but self-published.
Yeah.
Small print runs, only, what, 1,800 for the first few? Yeah. 3,000 was the maximum run for the original, like, first 10 of them. Why? Because it was an art magazine, I guess, more than it was. We'll get to the definitions again. Because also it had the original publication of Mouse in it, and Mouse was done as an insert, which was a much smaller comic, because that was quite small within the pages of it. And I suppose it's because I found one by accident when I was 18 and could just about afford to buy it. I thought, this is the most amazing object in the entire world. Like, what on earth is this? I'm going to buy it, then I'll find out what it is. So I suppose for me it was like a kind of an awakening that comics could be something different from the comics, the British comics, the American comics I was used to. And I still treasure it now.
Can I jump in? I'm sorry.
I'm so glad you chose Raw. It's kind of one of the things that launched me into comics at all was a show called Graphic Rap, which turned up at the ICA and came to the Liverpool Blue Coat Gallery where I was living at the time, and it completely turned me around. The size of the artwork, the fact that there was no no clear distinction between comics and art. There was Jerry Moriarty, there was Mark Bayer, there was Gary Panter, there was Bill Griffith, Art Spiegelman. I've never seen anything like it, and that and Weirdo magazine by Robert Crumb set me on the path towards self-publishing. So I thought it's different, it's radical, it's upsetting, it's strong. You know, it's everything I would love to be doing right now. So yeah, Raw magazine gets my vote.
That's two for Ron. What I'd like to talk about now is just as obviously time went on and different scenes arose, did you still follow what was occurring in the small press? So if you perhaps graduated, as one might say, out of the small press, Woodrow, so you were working in Blast and places like that, and were you still keeping track of the up and coming people? Say?
All the time. I think one of the things that was so exciting about going to small book fairs and going to festivals was just to walk around and see what was out there. I mean, I think most of us who make things like this, we're just excited to encounter new ideas in new forms. So yeah, look at everything and see what jumps out and get excited by some things. I mean, the handmade aspect of all of this stuff is kind of both the purpose of it, but also a bit of a red herring in a way. Because I think for most artists, we just want to have the nicest, best, loveliest format for the artwork we could get. And if we could get someone to do it all offset like that, then that would be great. But we couldn't really get that. So we got what we could get and made things as well as we could. If that meant sitting at home, cutting up bits of cardboard, sticking tape on that, and then using Crit Stick to put the stuck thing on the front, then that's what you did, because that's how you got your book out. But you know, that's just a means to an end, really. So although the handmade thing is nice, and you know, when you walk around book fairs looking at things, I'm always attracted to things that look like they have some evidence of making on them, but I'm always aware that that's not necessarily what people want to do, it's just what they kind of how to do to get the stuff out. And also that thing where, because we're all using not archive materials like Crit Stick and things, but in 20 years' time that's all going to fall off. And I'm sure your archives are full of things that are, you know, falling apart. The markers have faded, so there's nothing on the page now that was bright 20 years ago, all those things. So a lot of it is just make do with what equipment you have to make the best of it. But yes, I'm always looking to see what's happening and who's doing what. I buy lots of stuff that I don't even care about because it just looks nice. You know, it's like great paper, binding's great, interesting layout in it. I don't really want to read it, but it doesn't really matter really. I've got my money's worth just from enjoying the entire way this thing has been created. And some of that stuff is anti-corporate in a way. It's like people can experiment because they're making their own things. So you see lots of great experiments with layout and with, you know, composition and with style of them, because someone can just do what they want to do and not necessarily worry about whether it's going to be commercial or not.
In the expanded idea of people moving from small press elsewhere, Sarah, I'm thinking actually, have you found in the archive any names that you were surprised to see of people that have since gone on to do other things?
Become famous, you mean?
Well, that's one way of doing it.
There's a few in comics, there's a few people, a few names that then have gone on to Fantagraphics and things like that. So no people have gone massively famous Marvel-wise, but you know, established things like Eddie Wolf
A lot of successful artists start with something on their kitchen table, don't they? So, as you were saying, get out what you can and then it grows and you're very constantly.
Yeah, somewhere in the slides, if I can't see it right now, you'll see a Starhead comic catalogue. There it is. And Starhead Comics was like Mike Dowers started off as a zine maker and then decided he wasn't very good, but he was actually much better at connecting to other people and like distributing comics and putting them out there in the world. And then if you look at what Starhead were producing, essentially it almost became like a proving ground for Fantagraphics. about half of them end up working for Fantagraphics. So it's kind of crazy. You've got this very clearly underground thing that then becomes a quite, shall we say, it's a corporate kind of dimension to it in the end. That's what they're aspiring to in some ways.
Yeah, I think actually it's interesting to notice how many kind of zine makers went on to work in print production. Actually, quite a lot of them, because all those skills that you had to figure out how to figure out pagination and full colour and how it all works, then you naturally just drift into making better and better things with more expensive equipment and production. Like the people here can talk to that too.
I'm going to do now, because I think we've got about 15 minutes left. I think so, yes. So I'm going to throw it to the floor, hands up already. And I'm going to stand up, and I'm going to get my full guy. What's that?
Hi, not a question, but an observation which maybe people might want to comment on. Looking at those pictures, all those fast fiction covers, what really leaps out is the sheer range of approaches and sort of, it's so diverse. And I was a junior member, lucky to be a junior member of the sort of fast fiction collective back in the day. And what I remember at the time was mainstream comics was eating itself. It was a copy with diminishing returns. But when I met these folks, they were interested in all kinds of stuff. They were bringing, love of cinema, books, music, and not just art, but also love of life. And that was feeding into the comics. So that was what really made them stand out and special to me. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that was exciting about it was that you could make comics about anything. That was quite a radical idea to me, certainly, as in my early 20s, that there was no subject I couldn't write about. I think in my first thing that I sent to you was actually about buying shoes for somebody, and that was a real experience that I had. And I thought, that's a story, because it has a beginning and ending. It's about something. It's a connection, and the fact that I could do that just felt to me like really just so freeing. They could write about anything, and meeting people who just wrote about whatever it was that was on their minds. And so the variety of subjects and styles was, it was all really inspiring.
One lens I look at all of this through is a fine art college lens. It's what connects me with John Bagnall, and Chris Reynolds, and Tim Budden, and Mark Robinson, and Carol Swain. Probably some of us have left out. We all went to art college. I think art colleges used to be great. I don't know what they're like now, but they would give you that love of life, and they would give you that vast cultural stew and rich ideas that you could pick up on. Video, performance art, sound art, painting, sculpture, ceramics, screen printing. It's like Brian Eno used to say, if you went to art college at a certain time, it's like you could process a tremendous number of difficult, challenging things, and you'd be quite enthusiastic about it. And you'd say, yeah, come on, bring it on, throw it on, we'll do something with that. I saw that in fast fiction too, and it was, and that's why I say that it's not quite comics, but it was the fine art thing. And as Woodrow said, I keep forgetting it, but the social aspect was so important. Meeting people, actually going out there and greeting each other at the Westminster Comic Marts and having tea and scones afterwards, maybe that sort of thing.
The pub.
Oh, the pub food, yes. Well, there was a pub.
There was a pub.
At some point or another, yes. You mentioned the pub thing. You say this was also going on under our very noses at Westminster. Was the big professional guys from 2000 AD. And other UK artists were having their confabs, like David Lloyd now and more, when he still went out in public, would meet up at the Westminster Arms and talk about stuff. But then they didn't really mingle with us very much. But yeah, that social aspect was so strong. It was it's a lonely life being an artist, isn't it? You stop there behind the table. Are my ideas any good? Do they make any sense? And here you are with a dozen friends, 25 friends. They're saying, yes, that is good, and I'd like to be associated with it more. So, yeah, love of life, love of culture, everything you've said, Harley, resonates with me.
I just want to talk briefly about the fact that the distro service. I began by making this fast fiction info sheet, very technical sounding, and you took it over, didn't you, Ed? And I don't know, I can't remember quite, I have not really looked back at these, but I never made a point of saying, when I would get sent, usually in advance to the Comic Mart, I'd be sent a copy of what was going to be launched at the Comic Mart, what people would bring to the table. So I would then go over to the photocopy shop over the road and reduce the cover down small, and then type on a computer, an abstract or something, a little note about it, and people could order all these things, of course, from the sheet. But I didn't really review them. I didn't say, well, this is really not very good at all, or whatever. Some of it wasn't necessarily very good, but whatever came through, we would stock, and Ed, you took over the sheet. And did you also have a kind of, I don't know, what's the phrase, aquanimous? What is it? In other words, you didn't try and review and critique and say, don't bother buying this one.
On the contrary,
Of course.
I was very opinionated.
You were very opinionated, yes.
Yeah, I got more opinionated as time went on. Yes, it's, I got myself in hot water.
Yes, I see it. I could have warned you about that.
Yes, yeah, totally. But no, I did like to single out a comic that I thought was good and tell people why I thought it was good. So it was kind of
on the
a review.
Yeah, okay.
It was a challenge. How can you say something in a tiny little paragraph that
in a sentence,
sums
yeah.
it up somehow and makes people want to get interested in it? So yeah, I absolutely love doing that. Again, the artist collective thing came into play there. It was not equanimous, whatever this new word you've invented is.
That is something you see in fanzine culture in the 70s. Most fanzines have reviews of other fanzines.
Yeah.
And there's a...
The small mass explosion was a big one I used to get.
You can kind of trace the letters being sent between them. I've got a question.
While you're waiting, there's one thing I would say is that you could really see from month to month the influence of one group of people on another group of people, months. So an idea or a particular style or some kind of reproduction thing would happen, and then 3 months later you see a whole bunch of zines that are doing that thing. And actually you see on a kind of slower timeline for conventions when you go to Thought Bubble, and like I remember the year that Rhizo swept the entire kind of festival and everybody was doing Rhizo prints, and then next year there were loads of Rhizo books, that kind of thing.
I had a question about archives and preservation. So I used to make music scenes back in the late 90s, sellotape, Gridstick, most of that, famous newsagents. And yeah, sell them through teletext and the back of other zines, some 50p and some post envelopes, and I'll post it out to you. I'm just really interested to find out more about some of the challenges or different techniques you have to use for preserving zines, either ones that are printed or the original ones where you've got everything cut up and handwritten and stuff. So yeah, just really interested in that.
I would say it's impossible because you cannot prepare. So especially the early on, site stapling of like A4 pages all together, like that's crumbling apart, and there's no way of repairing the rip of a staple. So we kind of have a not hands-off approach with conservation, so like making things better. We just try to leave them as they are and just be very mindful of handling. There's been a couple of things that are like bind with thread, so someone doing like a knot type, I might fix that, or I might just like try to be quite, mindful of the page that has been read. But I think because of the nature of its ephemeral nature and its fragile nature, I think if we started applying proper preservation techniques, I mean, for Sarah it might be different because the level of preservation that happens in an archive is different from what in a library, where things are supposed to be used at a much quicker pace. I think there would be a level of artifice there that I don't know, I would personally not feel comfortable with. So it's just about mindfulness with preservation. Do you want to say something?
That's all true, and I think what you're referring to is the professional approach of preventative conservation, so you kind of stabilise something rather than trying to repair it. We also don't really have endless or any really conservation budgets, so you probably could use Japanese paper and wonderful sort of techniques to repair.
Take it to a repair shop.
Yeah, exactly. See, if you see, the techniques that people use on the repair shop. Well, I mean, yeah, so we don't really have those facilities or skills. We can bring them in from the National Conservation Service. We do have a subscription to that service, and we can use that for advice, and we can send them specific items from any of our collections if we want to. But we rarely do use that advice, but we rarely do.
One thing that I just realized actually that is not an obvious challenge, but is something that I encounter actually has to do with the previous question with the matter of community and how embedded all these people are. With lots of our collections, especially things that have been donated, are filled with letters and personal addresses and personal people's details. So obviously there's two layers here. When someone makes a scene or a small press comic, they're not intended to be mass read. So people might be divulging things about themselves, about their personal lives that we need to tread really carefully with. So with the, the way that a student might be taking a picture of something where someone's telling an anecdote about the sexual life, and if that is related to a legal name, that might get someone in trouble. But then with all those personal addresses that are part of the, all these people that were emailing each other, mailing each other and telling all these things, and that's part of the item, but you need to be very careful with how you manage that. So that's also an added thing of the community aspect of the material.
I would also say that you've got an example of our conservation on the table, because actually what we practically do is to package things in a way that makes them as easy as possible to handle without them incurring further damage. So, they might sort of arrive in supermarket cardboard boxes type of thing. Well, obviously they're very acidic, they're not going to give any protection to the item, and will be jumbled up. And just sort of rummaging around in there, the act of rummaging around is obviously going to create more damage to the items. So the thing that we can do, and is our regular practice, is to separate out each item, place it in its own sort of Renonex archival plastic wallet, put it in an archival enclosure, it's called a folder of some description, and then we can produce those to people in a reasonably controlled environment, but hopefully not a sanitised environment, so that you can still enjoy it. And and then individual handling of it is very unlikely to cause much more damage. It won't really, because you're handling it carefully, and then it goes back into that housing again. So there's that kind of, and anyone can do that. We can do that at home as well. You can't say who hasn't got piles of stuff in boxes, but you can do that in any practice really. So that's, I suppose, an answer to your question about how do we preserve things and how would you preserve things. So that's what we tend to do. We also use brass paper clips. They're the answer to taking out samples, put brass paper clip on instead.
No, it's fine. I was going to say, actually, there are some things that can't be archived. In the mid-80s, I fed with a mail art crowd, and we were doing this stuff where we fax comics to each other. Fax machines, for young people, were based on heat-treated paper. So the paper was coated, heat was applied to it, and it turned black. But over time, that fades. So I've got all these issues of faxed comics that are just blank paper now. You can't see a thing, gone, nothing. And that's it.
Reduce the light levels on the items. We have some flax paper in other collections, and they're a bit like continuity, they're a bit like Polaroids.
Yeah.
So yeah, they do fade if there's too much light on them. So reduce the light levels.
Oh, well, mine were in a drawer, and I put them out, and it's like, oh, there's nothing out.
One more question.
Let's brief one final note about all this archiving is that the other important person that's helped small press comics get archived at the British Library is Bob McConnell. What's his name? Yes. Yeah, that's his name. Who is still with us, but not unfortunately still dealing. But at the Comic Mart, he was a real figurehead, and he was able to sell quite a substantial collection of small press UKZs and comics to the British Library. When with John Parastoni I was co-curating Comics Unmasked 12 years ago, my God, we went through everything, a lot of stuff, and these fabulously, or sort of super archival, heavy sort of
black coated sort of folder things would turn up, and you'd go, what's ever in here? And there'd be this really, I'm sorry, this really scuzzy, punky, sort of probably tiny edition, maybe 10 copies have been done. I don't think that the maker had any clue that it would ever be quite so preserved like the Bear Tapestry or something. And often, I'm afraid they weren't very good either. Well, it's awfully nice, but they could put them back again into the archive. Yeah.
And one more question about point about the British Library is
Yeah.
that if you're publishing something in the UK,
Oh, yes,
you're
yes.
comics, you're legally supposed to send it. You don't have to have it.
I see something like that, yeah. I can remember when Peter Sam and we were horrified. We've got to send like 7 copies or something. No, this is for the regional libraries.
That's only other question.
Oh, I didn't realise this, but that stage when we were doing Escape, we can't send them 7 copies, they're not going to pay for
It had
it.
an ISSN problem as well,
Yes,
yes.
of course it was that, yes. Sorry.
No, it's the ISSN or ISBN, it doesn't matter. It's one copy of the British Library, and then on request within a year to the 5 regional ones. So there was one more question. Yeah, so the last question.
Thank you so much. This was such an interesting panel, and I'm very happy to see the collection because so I work on underground comics myself, and I've been using that collection a lot for my own research, so it makes me very happy to see it. But also, I mean, I'm actually curious as well, relating to one of the previous questions about, the maintenance of these archives, and I was thinking about what you might think could be the future of these archives. Do you see it sort of growing and expanding and perhaps adding more titles to it? And also in terms of preservation, I mean, I can imagine it must be quite hard to do that, especially with, a lot of the material like you were saying. But I was also wondering about the sort of potential, maybe, digitization of these archives. Of course, it might lose some of that, essence of obviously working with the actual material. But I was wondering what your thoughts are on this.
I'm going to hand the mic to my information management colleagues and the thing, but digitisation is a trigger word with me. I absolutely love it. Scanning fragile paper material and gives you the opportunity to preserve the digital scans in a way, and through digital preservation, which I do, they can be much more permanent than if you just keep them on a hard drive. And then you've got the opportunity to produce in facsimiles or PDF or JPEGs, which can be disseminated over the web, licensing and copyright permitting. Now, the only reason it's a trigger word is because everybody thinks it's easy and everybody thinks it's cheap, and it ain't. People who don't know anything about library and archives, everybody here accepted, of course, but people come up to my career and say, why haven't you scanned everything yet? And we've got yards and yards of shelves we don't know anything about. We haven't even accessioned it, let alone are in a position to produce a digital facsimile of it. You really got to have a catalogue in place before you can do that, would be my argument. But it really is not cheap. It's not as simple as everybody thinks. And it doesn't solve all your problems. Everybody seems to think, well, how do you digitise it all? Well, that's the only thing that matters in the world of the web and everything. You can take all that paper out and burn it. It's worthless. And they also think they don't realise that there's a digital footprint involved when you create all these scans, which is another consideration in today's world of carbon footprints and damage to the environment. We don't want to keep on filling up cloud storage drives with too many scans of things. So that said, yeah, I'd love to do it.
Absolutely agree with everything you said there. But yeah, I mean, we do digitise from our collections, but we have quite strict criteria on what we can select, and it does need to be catalogued first, because otherwise all you're doing is creating a random selection of digital files with randomly applied file names that mean nothing to anybody except the computer, and the next time you ask the computer to generate it, it will generate something different. So there's absolutely no history or no meaning whatsoever in any of the file names that the computer generates, which means that you can't link it back to anything real, and you've got a jumble of digital files with no link to anything that would actually mean anything to you or me or anybody else. So yeah, it's wonderful, but but there's a lot of work and maintenance that needs to happen alongside scanning items to make them useful to anybody else or ourselves to look at. And yeah, you're quite right, you know, we have a digital preservation system, as Ed does at London University, and we have, you know, people in posts who manage all of that material. We have to have rights, and obviously in this environment, in this type of material, it may not be that easy to get hold of the rights, because you've got to know who created them, you've got to know when, you've got to know when to get, how to get back to them. The nature of the way in which all of these items were produced, I mean, obviously some makers are sitting here in front of us, so we could ask you, but you know, the nature of a lot of this making is that it was underground, it wasn't necessarily, you know, you didn't necessarily have lots of contact details. Even if you had contact details then, they're probably not, may or may not be correct now. So there's a lot of management work that has to go on around creating digital facsimiles before they are useful or legal or shareable. So.
I just wanted to remind us that historically, libraries, for example in America, would not keep the comic sections of the Sunday newspapers because they didn't think anyone, they were just the comics, the news is the important stuff. And so a lot of them got dumped, got thrown away. But sometimes they did, when they did get around to putting them onto microfilm, we all know about the wonders of microfilm, or not, they then said, well, now we don't need to keep the Sunday pages because we put them on microfilm. And so there are stories of libraries in America disposing of them. There's a famous story where somebody had kept all of Crazy Cat, the Sunday pages by George Harriman, and they had been left out in a barn or somewhere, and they just fused into a solid lump. Probably now it could be AI could probably do something with it. But the point is that technology isn't always going to be a solution. And also we have the question of institutions themselves not realizing that actually the comics are equally important as the rest of the newspaper. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
So responding to the part of like the keep collecting and the future, for the library is quite different than from archives because we have these collections that are kind of format based, so like the scene collection, small press comics, and when you look at those collections is when you really are very realize that how not neutral your job is. So since the collection started in 2009, the scene collection, and with the small press comics, same thing, the change of the people that has been working there completely changes what the focus in collecting has happened. Because on one hand, so the collection, the scene collection was started by Leila Casio, who was also working with scenes as a volunteer, was very involved with the people that are, you know, making scenes. So that also created like a very specific type of collecting. The people that came afterwards had another focus, like the day that I leave, who will have a different focus. So it makes you feel very aware of your responsibility, of your own biases, and what you're choosing to collect, what you're choosing to preserve, and what you don't, and how then you pass on to the new people that work with the collection.
Just as a matter, I'm going to take this as a final thing, I'm afraid, because we are out of time. And the other thing is with archives is being able to publish it, which Dark and Golden, we've been able to pull some of these things out of the past and present them in formats that maybe they weren't even shown that when they were originally published. So yeah, there's always things in history that we can push into the future. But with that, I'm going to close the panel. Thanks everybody for coming and watching us talk here. Thanks everybody on the panel.
Okay, very, very quick break. We're back at 3 o'clock with Contemporary Fantasy. But do check out